Welcome to the Dental Implant Practices podcast, where each episode will explore how to integrate dental implants into your practice and into bone, with your host, Dr. Philip Gordon.
Hey guys, thanks for being listeners to the show. Go to dentalimplantpractices.com and find all of our resources. Also find us on Facebook, Dental Implant Practices page on Facebook, and go to iTunes and leave me a review on iTunes so we can help spread the message. Thanks.
Welcome back to another episode of the Dental Implant Practices podcast. I'm your host, Philip Gordon, and today it's a huge honor for me to have Darwin Bagley, the Director of Technical Services with Attachments International. Darwin, thanks for being on the show today.
Oh, my pleasure. It was good seeing you last week at the seminar.
Yeah. We met up again last week at an Implant Direct seminar in Las Vegas, where Darwin works at the headquarters of International Attachments International, which is also owned by Implant Direct and the parent company Danaher. So, Darwin, let's start off and kind of tell me a background of your work history and kind of bring it up to speed with
sure.
What you're doing today and all the company mergers and all the technical way that you've been through the career, because I know you've had a long time in dentistry and experienced a lot.
Yeah, I've been around a long time. I'm a technician, and I actually started out in Salt Lake City. I went to a lab school. There's not many lab schools left anymore. But anyway, it's now closed. Anyway, I went to a lab school in Salt Lake and got on in a conventional lab.
When was that?
Oh, in the 70s.
Okay.
And then I was working in a conventional lab and then got on with an in-house lab, and that I much preferred, where you actually see the patients. Kind of like what Clear Choice is doing now, where they'll have the, like a removable technician right there. Because as you know, these mainly doing removals. As you know, these removals take so many appointments, from the initial impression to the custom trade, to the bite registration, to the first try-in, the second try-in, et cetera, et cetera. So it just goes much smoother when you're having the technician right there. So I much preferred that as to working in a conventional lab. And then I got on in 1990 with Attachments International. It was in the San Francisco Bay Area. And we were the first. Attachments International was the first company really to sell at what they call aftermarket implant components. So we made components compatible with 6 or 7 of the most commonly used implants. And everybody said, oh, you can't do this. Well, now there's all kinds of aftermarket sources, for implants.
Was there much resistance to that early on? I mean, because that was back in the early days, and you were kind of doing aftermarket sales on these implant companies, and I imagine there was probably some resistance from the big companies, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they saying you can't do that. You avoid the warranties and, and all that, but it was super successful.
Yeah. And
more and more aftermarket sources now, even Straumann bought Medentica, and Straumann will make abutments for other implants, and they were the biggest one probably saying, oh, you can never do this.
Straumann was back in the day?
And Nobel, right. Yeah. And they just thought we would disappear. It just came more and more. And then actually Attachments International was the first source for a UCLA abutment. Nobel wouldn't even make them. It was called Nobel Pharma back then. And it was I think in 1988, something about there. And it was at actually UCLA. The technician had a case with those standard abutments, coming up through the bridge, like for what they call a high water design, those standard abutments. And they wanted to do crown and bridge on it, not a hybrid denture bridge. And, it looked terrible. It was going to be hygienically impossible and no emergence profile, kind of squatty looking crowns. So the technician asked the doctor if we can get some patterns. He could take out the abutments, get some patterns that fit directly to the implant. Mm-hmm. And Nobel Pharma didn't have those or recommend that. So Dr. Lewis and Bremer called my boss, Peter Staubli. He's from Switzerland, but he lived here, owner of Attachments International, asked for prototypes that would fit directly to the Brandmarks. And we made non-engaging castable cylinders that they waxed up and cast to make a screw-retained bridge that had an emergence profile coming through the tissue that was cleansable. And so that's why they call it UCLA abutment. So that term, UCLA, refers to a bridge or a crown that fits directly to the implant with no, multi-unit abutment in between. Some people think UCLA stands for Universal Connecting something, but no. It just means it comes from actual UCLA University.
Great. Yeah. So So you guys met some resistance at front with making attachments, but over the years it became quite popular, and now it just kind of seems like an ordinary part of dentistry.
Yeah, no, well, right. We proved that it works.
Yeah,
and it's a lot of competition out there nowadays for the aftermarket.
Yeah. So so Implant Attachments International was in San Francisco for a number of years, and then kind of keep working through that progression.
Right. Well, then my boss went through a divorce and needed to make a sale and pay off the ex, and so he sold to a company called Enova that was up in Toronto, then an implant company, and then Enova was purchased by Cybron. And then Cybron was purchased by Danaher, so it's all the bigger fishes eating the smaller fishes, and so now, and then Danaher bought Implant Direct, so that's when they kind of merged us together. So that's when I moved to the educational center here in Vegas, and now, then Danaher actually purchased Nobel Biocare.
Yeah, is Cybron kind of dissolved now?
Yeah. They phrased it as Cybron purchasing Implant Direct, but Cybron's kind of gone away. They're kind of no more. They had some implants that were actually manufactured in Korea, just kind of discontinued them and went away.
Yeah, and now, as you said, Danaher bought Nobel Biocare. So who knows what the next 5 years are going to look? Who knows what the next 5 years are going to look like, huh?
Yeah, they say they'll keep us separate, but we'll see how that goes.
Yeah.
And I think it's like $2.2 billion. That was a big one. It goes back and forth between Nobel and Straumann as the two largest in the world.
Yeah, it just depends when somebody buys somebody out, then they jump back up to I'm the biggest because I sell more worldwide. Yeah. And then they buy this company and say, no, I'm the biggest because we have more sales with this now. So it's just kind of a who's who competition for them, isn't it?
Right. No kidding.
So you've seen a lot of things. Let's start off with you give some lectures on implant identification, because some people will send you in some x-rays or some stuff placed in the early 80s that, a restoring doc or an old surgeon won't have any clue what it is, and you'll kind of help out with that, right? So kind of talk me through some of that implant identification that you do. Yeah,
well, we call it implant forensics, kind of like CSI. I actually did a lecture for the Nevada Association here on implant forensics. I'm even hooked up with a couple of doctors that do that, where they actually identify remains, right? So that's become part of it. If you can kind of track down what implants they have in that area, contact the reps to help kind of locate who this person is. The one doctor actually went back to 9/11. My personal doctor in California went back to 9/11 for identification. And then our hygienist that works here, her doctor was actually went back to Katrina to help identify bodies. And so that's now become part of it, is if they have implants, tracking it down. Well, funny, there was a case in the paper where they found that some teenagers found this little jaw with completely edentulous with 4 implants. You could see they were Straumann's and everything with locator abutments. But anyway, in the newspaper it said a nurse says it's a smaller jaw, so it belongs to either a woman or a child. Well, I think we can rule out child.
Yeah, they're not putting implants in 12-year-olds, so it's probably a female. But yeah, you can. There's been a lot of kind of historical phases through. Each 5 or 10 years. What was being invented and what was being placed. So you can kind of look at maybe the age of the person and look at the implants and try to figure out what kind of implant it was and what they were using that time, and whether it's identification for a deceased person, or maybe it's just identification because a doctor wants to get some parts to fit it.
Oh yeah, well yeah, of course, that's the main thing. We get that every day throughout the day, and it's just what implant is this? The patient just showed up, and we need to identify it to restore it, or something's broken, or we just need a screw or an abutment. So the first thing, of course, we ask for is X-rays. And periapicals are preferred over panos, if possible, because that's sharper detail. Yeah. And then that's preferred over cone beam. Sometimes they send us a cone beam image, but that doesn't give us much definition to identify an implant. So we prefer periapicals, and we'd like nice and clear where the implants look translucent. Mm-hmm. And to do that, the X-ray needs to be taken perpendicular. And especially like on the maxillaries where they're tipping forward, and then they put the X-ray perpendicular to the face, but the implants aren't perpendicular, then they look blurry, or they look kind of opaque. So you have to kind of tip it up to get the X-ray image perpendicular to the implant. And that's kind of a starting point. And we want to see the entire body of the implant if possible. And then the more the better. If they can, send us photos of the abutments, unscrew an abutment or set the abutment next to a millimeter ruler, or set the screw next to a millimeter ruler, get these photos in focus, please. Mm-hmm. And, the more the better. Intraoral photo looking into the implant. And sometimes I'll get a photo looking straight down on an implant, and which is a little bit, you get like it's hard to tell if it's internal or external. I mean, we need maybe an angle, like oblique angle as well. Mm-hmm. We can tell a little more 3D, what the internal interface looks like. But getting a photo of an abutment, next to a millimeter helps the mating surface, not the top portion, the mating surface where it connects. And then we may never even find out what brand it is. It may be from who knows where, but we may find that it's compatible with something like, a Screwvent or a Branimark or a Straumann, or might be something compatible, hopefully.
Yeah. Now that's a whole nother issue in and of itself, the compatibility. Let's talk about attachments just for a second, or connections, because there's basically two types of connections. There's external and there's internal, right?
Right, yeah.
And then within the external...
The original Branimarks.
Yeah, within the external, it's everything's sitting on top of the implant. And that's generally kind of like your original Branimark has an external hex that sits up. And then everything else since then has kind of gone internal connection. So
right. So
on the internal... Then you've got basically two things you're looking at. Is it a hex? Is it a hexagon? So 6 sides, or is it an octagon? Is it 8 sides? Right.
Right. Or some internals, it's not even a hex; it's just little lobes.
Yeah. Or the trilobe. Right. So you've got internal, you've got hex, you've got octagon, and then you've got like the trilobe. Right. And then you've also got.
There's even some that had 6 lobes.
Yeah, 6 lobes. Okay, so you've got lobes. So you've got 3 lobes or 6 lobes, and then you've got a butt joint, and then you've got internal. You've got tapering. So you've got maybe like a Morse taper, which is a type of a taper. You've got conical connection, and then you've got various degrees of angles on those types of tapers. Some are X amount degree angled. What are some common angles? What's Implant Direct angle, or what's a
like our legacy is like a screw vent, which went back to the original core vent. It has a 45 degree bevel leading into the hex.
Okay.
So then there's the interactive that's like the Nobel active, and that has like a 78 degree, or you can measure it 12 degree from the other side. So it's a much steeper. That's what they call conical connection. The hex is deeper.
Okay,
and
so that
creates a better seal.
Yeah, so that's a 78 degree, or if you angle from the other way, a 12 degree.
12,
close. And then you got your legacy, which, like you said, was like the original core vent, and that's 45 degree.
Yeah, 45 degree. And I like the lead-in bevels. Now, some of them, like these trilobes, they're actually a flat top.
Yeah, that's like a butt joint.
A butt joint. And doctors tell me that the healing caps stink when you take them out, right? I mean, so that tells you something on the seal, right?
Yeah, they do. Now, what's the swish, or the one that's compatible with like Zimmer and BioHorizons and MIS? I think those are all compatible, basically. Right.
Well, yeah, they have different ones, but the MIS has one called 7. They now have a conical connection too that's unique. It's actually a little spline.
Okay.
And so it gets tricky. And
what's the angle? What's the angle on those? Do you know?
Oh well, I'm not sure on their conical connection. On their 7, it's a 45 degree, just like our legacy.
Okay.
But there's some like an Astra, I think it's like 8 or Straumann is 8 degrees. Astra, I think is like 12. I mean, so it can be tricky in that regard. But it really helps getting those perpendicular periapicals so we can see those type of features.
Sure. Now, so you've got external, you got internal connection, you've got a hex, you've got an octagon, you've got lobes, you've got different angles, which create, different types of connections, and based upon that, you can really hook up to any kind of implant. Do you have like a kind of compatibility sheet that you keep that shows, what's compatible to what and what can be traded out for what?
Yeah. There's a good site called Genios.
Okay. What's that?
Genie, Genios. And they have a compatibility chart you can download.
Okay.
And they also have a really nice torque chart that tells you all the different torque levels and the screw sizes.
Okay.
And sometimes that's the issue. People say, I have a such and such implant, I need a screwdriver. So they have it, and then they'll ask, what torque level do you take it to?
Yeah.
So go to Genios, and I think they call it Tools Under Tools, and you can download a nice torque chart that'll list, 20 different implants, and it'll give the torque the recommended torque levels and which screwdriver to use.
Oh yeah, because
there's a big variance.
Yeah, we're just talking the interfaces on the
they have
implants themselves.
Yeah, they have that too.
But then you go into each implant's got a different type of prosthetic piece. They might have a
right.
A 1.25 millimeter hex. They might have a 1.5 millimeter hex or a 0.5, or the unigrip, or
right.
There's different types of drivers on top of the prosthetics too. So I feel like we're seeing some torque, some crossover with implant companies saying, okay, let's just try to make sure we're within one of these major common brands, but you still see some deals with that now. So we've talked about the connections. When it comes to screws and screwdrivers, what are you seeing there? I mean, what's common torque settings, or what's common screw sizes, or let's go into screws. Screw loosening, broken screws. Let's just cover everything with screws for a minute.
Right. The Implant Direct screws, a lot of them we make them so that they'll accept our standard 1.25 millimeter hex, which is also called 0.05 hex, and that's pretty common. That's the same with like Zimmer, BioHorizons, Astra. So a bunch use that. One thing that's tricky is some people will have a slightly smaller one called 0.048, and that's from like 3i or Keystone. And they'll round out their screw. They'll have that one that's too small. Then they're trying to torque to 30 newtons, and they'll round out the 0.05 hex.
Yes.
So now you've got a screw where your screwdriver is just turning and turning, and you've rounded out that hex in the screw. So you have to be careful in that regard, because they kind of look the same by eye, but they're not. If you're going up that smaller screwdriver. And we have a little tool actually called SXT, which means screw removal tool, that for that instance where the head of the screw is rounded out, and it has reverse threads. So as you push down or push against the screw and go counterclockwise, it actually digs into the screw, and so you can get out those screws where the hex is rounded out.
Now who do I need to buy that through?
Oh, well, we have that.
Okay.
We just call it SXT, screw removal tool, and it has the reverse threads that with kind of a little tapered point that it kind of wedges into that rounded out hex.
Yeah, well, that seems like something everybody should have in their toolbox, doesn't it?
Oh yeah, and because that can kind of spoil your day. And the other issue is if you break the head of the screw off. And usually when screws break, is they get loose first. So the patient's been wearing this crown that's kind of wiggly loose. They bite down and then they break the head of the screw off, and hopefully they don't swallow the crown.
Yeah.
And then there's certain ways to removing that fragment. I mean, you can go in with sometimes you can just get a scalar tip, a little pointy scalar tip, and kind of catch it. Because when the head of the screw breaks off, there's no clamping on the remaining part of the screw.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's only with the head there it does the clamping. So when that head's broke off, now the screw's hopefully kind of just floating in there.
Sure. And
then you can first try a little scalar or explore. And if that doesn't work, Astra makes something called a fragment fork. So it's a latch type tip with little backwards teeth. It's made out of tungsten carbide with little backwards teeth on the end of it. And you can go in slow and reverse in a handpiece, and that usually will back them out.
I've also heard maybe just a round burr slow on reverse.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's what Dr. Christensen recommends, like a 1/2 round burr, a little tiny one, to make a little dimple in there and go slow in reverse. But I like that. People seem to like that fragment fork.
Okay. And that's from Astra?
Yeah, Astra Tech.
Yeah.
And that works really well. They have two sizes. Get the one they call large is most common.
That sounds like something that sounds like something you guys need to make too.
Yeah, we really should have that available so we don't have to source it out.
Yeah.
But you have to be careful on your torque levels. Some on these narrow platform implants, some of the smaller ones like the narrow Astras, you only go 15 newtons, and like the Ankylos, you only go 15.
Yeah.
And I know we're creatures of habit.
And I know the Nobel Active 3.0, you only go 315.
Right.
Yeah.
And on their angled multi-units.
On their angled multi-units, you only go 15, yeah.
Well, on the final screw. On the main screw going into the implant, you get 30 or 35. But that little screw, it's tiny and it only gauges like 1.5 threads.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's easy to strip out those threads. And we're creatures of habit, right? We're in a habit of going 30 all the time. And another issue is some of these bending beam torque wrenches, the one where you just bend the beam.
Yep. It's
so easy just to pull it a little bit extra, and all of a sudden you've gone from 15 to 30, just a little whoops. So that's one of the advantage to the clicking torque wrenches.
They say those are more accurate. You're right, but it's also easy to be off a little bit by pulling too much.
Yeah, and it's hard to see it sometimes, but if it works for you, great. Just know that it's not much pulling at all. You can be way over your 15.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so always check with the manufacturer what they recommend. Depends on the diameter of the threads. And like Ankylos, what they've started doing is they use a little tiny 0.9 hex, 0.9 millimeter hex. They made the hex so small because they only want 15 newtons. So it's hard to your hex of the screwdriver will break off sometimes if you try to go 30 with that tiny little hex. So
yeah, I've
that
busted
to happen,
a couple of those myself.
Because with Ankylos, that has that severe Morse taper. So if you break off a screw or break off an abutment, those are darn hard to get out because they wedge in so tight. Sometimes there's an issue with some of these all zirconia crowns. And I don't like the all zirconia where the interface is zirconia.
Yeah,
I've seen too many of those break off.
I think most people are getting away from that. I think most people are doing a titanium insert that sits in the implant, and then it transition to zirconia after it inserts in the implant.
Yeah, so the interface for the implant and the interface for the head of the screw is all metal.
Correct.
Because I've seen cases where they have all zirconia in like an Astra implant or Ankylos, and then the darn zirconia interface is broken off down in the implant.
Yeah.
And one thing you can do is you can make like some little tweezer. Sometimes you get part of a tweezer that has a little hook on the end, or cut a little hook into it. That way you can push that down there, kind of hook that zirconia and get that darn thing out. Those are hard to get out of those Morse taper implants. So you can make yourself a little hook tool with some tweezers and hook the darn thing out.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, right. Yeah. 3i even had some they called Bellatech, all zirconia, and they discontinued them for that reason on their certains. It's not such a problem with external hex implants, but the all zirconia with the internal, that's where they can break. So they discontinued those because of just for that reason.
Yeah,
I think the market.
Yeah, I think most people realize those are probably not the best now. So hopefully there's nobody out there still restoring that way.
No, they're still doing it. But
yeah, I'm sure they are, but hopefully there's not too many. Okay, well that covers the screws quite a bit. Why don't we talk about locators? I know you said you get a ton of questions about locators, and those are a great way to restore people, and I think a great thing nowadays. So let's talk a little bit about locators. Obviously the Zest locator attachments and all that.
You're right. We sell the Zest brand locator. We're kind of a redistributor of those. Yeah. And they're, I'd say, the most popular attachment, and for good reason, because they work so well.
Yeah.
Now, the locator came out, I think, 1999, but the first one was for roots. We talked about a little bit about that last week.
Yeah.
And I talked to a doctor yesterday, actually, in a clinic, and he says he still does them because they get insurance coverage. He does the original locators into roots. I say, well, why don't you pull that darn thing and put in an implant? He says, well, sometimes it comes down to cost where the patient will have insurance coverage, which will pay 80% if you're putting the locator attachment into a root, where they won't pay on the implant. So they're still doing them, but they have them that cement into a root.
They can
the original one. They even have angled ones, a 10 and a 20 degree for cementing into a root, and they even have some that the lab will cast to. But one problem is that a doctor will use their conventional before they ask, they'll cut down the clinical crown, do their endo. They'll go in with like their regular drills like they would for a post and core crown, send that impression to the lab and tell the lab they want a locator. Well, they can't do that. The locator, for roots are pre-machined in stainless steel. And so you can't fit it down in your die, in your model. So they have, Zest has specific pilot drill, a specific countersink drill that you prepare into the root before the impression. Otherwise, the lab would have to use some kind of a plastic O-ring attachment or something else. But you can't really cut off that steel post and cast to a steel. That doesn't work. So be sure the dentist uses the proper drills for sizing those roots if you're going to do that.
Also, maybe not the best, but still a bailout option maybe for somebody who can't afford anything else, and maybe a way to temporize some people for a while until they get into treatment down the road.
Oh yeah, for sure.
That might not be a bad thing.
Right. And one issue I see real common with locators, though, is that the implants are placed facially, especially on maxilla. Those implants are kind of flared out and real facial. I'd like to see on those maxilla locator cases, bring those more palatal. Because otherwise, you get it to draw. It snaps and everything, but then the acrylic gets so thin and the denture teeth get so thin that they just start popping off and cracking.
Yeah.
So let's try to get our implant placement kind of more in lingually, especially on those uppers. And sometimes you can even see the housings through the acrylic.
Sure.
And, the labs can opaque the housings, turn them pink. That helps a little bit, but still it's really, so close that you're worried about that denture breaking. And,
but for someone, let's just say the bone's flared out and you don't have any options and the implant's flared out, is there a multi-unit for the Zest?
Well, Zest now makes another one that's forgiving for 30 degrees, or sometimes the labs need to cast to make a custom angled locator.
Yeah.
That's where,
is that something
actually wax and cast to one?
Yeah. Is that something you guys can do? Is make a?
Well, we have a cast to. Well, we have a cast to. It's one that you cast to bars, but rather than casting to a bar, you'll actually just cast it to a UCLA. So the dentist would take an implant level impression.
Sure.
The lab would get a UCLA in this cast to locator. This way you can set the locator back over the ridge where it needs to be or back in lingually and just cast to it. There's also a new company now called True Abutment. TRU, no E. So TRU Abutment, True Abutment. So you can send them an implant level model and they'll CAD CAM a custom angled locator in titanium. So it's all in titanium.
So then
the other way the lab would cast to it.
You just screw it in and you're done there, huh?
Right.
That serves as the locator for you?
Level impression.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Well, right. It's compatible with the locator males. So that's called trueabutment.com. There's kind of new.
That sounds like something else. That sounds like something else you should be doing too.
Yeah. Well, we got to get going on that as well. You're right. Then on uppers, you really need 4 implants to take away the palate.
Yeah, absolutely.
People putting in the two locators and removing the palate and the darn dentures falling down in the back.
Yeah, that just doesn't work well.
But we find on the lower that 3 actually works really well. The tripod it.
3.
Some people say
3's a lot better than 3's better than 2 for 3. Sure.
Yeah, and if you do 3, you can put 2 in the first bi area and then 1 right in the center.
Yeah.
You can get them back. Now, if you only do 2 and you put them in the first bi area, your denture will be kind of tippy. But if you're only going to do 2, put those more in the cuspid, in between the cuspid and laterals. But if you're going to do 3, try to get the 2 in the first bi and then 1 in the center, and that seems as good as 4 on lowers, really. The 3. The advantage of 4, of course, you can change to fixed later on easier if they want to decide to do that.
Yeah, that definitely provides you more stability if you do. If you do
resistance
4
to lift off the back of the.
Yeah, if you can increase your AP spread, obviously that's going to give you better stability and all those things. So
right, because the patient says, I bite in the front, it lifts in the back.
Yeah.
So having that wider AP spread, helps in that regard for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then another question we get about locators is relining. And we found that a lot of times when you do a reline impression, Zest recommends you put in the black liner. So you take out the whatever color you have, put in the black processing liners, and then they say just take an impression. But we found that it works better if you can do an impression, use light or even wash material. If you use like regular to medium, it kind of holds the denture up, and then you go to get it back from the reline and it won't quite seat. The snaps won't quite seat down.
Yeah.
So we found that the light body works better for your reline impression for locators.
Yeah, I found that light body works well too, because you can just squish it in there good, and as long as you don't have a big void to fill. I mean, if it's a huge void, maybe medium body, but that light body does pretty good because it's basically like a wash. And, the denture is already like a custom tray, and you're just trying to wash, maybe at tops less than a millimeter in most places. So I think it does a lot better that way.
Right. Or otherwise you're back to, cold curing them in. And then,
and that's a different deal.
Yeah.
There's plus and minuses with
another way to do it is you can actually remove the housings that are in there, get new housings, and then take a reline impression over that. Then that way the lab would push the analog to the new males, or with the transfers, push those in the reline impression. Right.
Yeah,
but,
absolutely.
I found that actually on a new case, it's probably most accurate to cold cure in the final housings into the new denture. What you can do is still use the locator impression pieces. They look like the little upside down wine glass.
Sure.
Pull those off in the impression. The lab makes the locator analogs, but they use something called the processing spacer. So it's a white plastic processing spacer. They push that down over the analogs. They process the new denture around that, so when it comes back to you, you have an ideal void all ready to go.
Yeah.
And then you just have the patient close down lightly while you cure those in.
Yeah.
And then you have the most accurate transfer.
Yeah, and then you just pick them up in the mouth, right?
Well, that's the idea, but it could be tricky if they don't do that, making the void in the correct location. Because we've seen it time and time again where you hog out the denture, you'd swear you made enough, but it's riding high somewhere on the housing as you're trying to pick them up.
Sure.
And now your denture's not seated. And so now you're kind of going around in circle, having to grind them out again. So if you're going to locate it, you want to get some indicating paste, or maybe some of that liquid articulating liquid, that red articulating liquid, paint that on there on the housings, set the denture down, and you'll locate. It's hard to identify exactly where that housing is hanging up.
Yeah,
it is. You have to definitely have space all around before you do your pickup.
Yeah,
what kind of pickup material do you usually use? The chair side?
Yeah, I'm using chair side from
the one from Zest. Okay.
Yeah, that one from Zest, and it works well. You just, like you said, you have to make sure you get it hogged out right. I think my lab uses those processing spacers. I do all the try-ins and all that. I recommend people use a full rubber dam, not just those little white things they send you. Put a full rubber dam on it, because I've locked in more than I care to share, and that'll keep you from getting your undercuts. And then you just polish and snap in your inserts, and I think you're off to the races. So it works pretty good with those spacers.
I was going to mention that. I would just make sure you use the thin rubber dam. Some of those rubber dams are thick.
No. You want it real thin.
A thin rubber glove.
Yeah.
Some doctors use a thin rubber glove and cut that, or even go to the hardware store and get some Teflon tape, the wide Teflon tape.
Yeah.
And that'll prevent locking in any undercuts, because that can ruin your day.
Yes, it can.
For sure. Or even saran wrap works.
Hey.
And then so you'd put down the white spacer, put down the saran wrap or Teflon tape, now push on the housings with the black insert, now do your cold curing.
Yep.
And you don't have to worry, are you going to...
And always try in the denture. Yeah, always try in the denture a couple times, sure, to make sure you got the space, and then measure twice or three times before you cut and cure, and I think you're better off. Now what about immediate load? Talk to me a little bit about immediate load. There's a lot of that going on. People doing these teeth in a day and pickups and immediate load, or even immediate load temporaries on a single. So talk to me about this immediate load concept.
Well, right. Teeth in a day. See, the very first implant bridges in the U.S. was that what they call the high water fixed detachable Branamark, right?
Yes.
That was popular in the 80s, early 90s. It kind of disappeared. And then it came back with in a big way in the last, 10, 12 years. And a lot of the thanks, I think, goes to Clear Choice for all the advertising they've done.
Yep.
So that's done us all a good. Sometimes the patients show up and they say, yeah, I want a Clear Choice bridge. So you know what they're talking about. They're talking about a hybrid denture bridge. So our business has gone on a cycle. in that regard. And their big selling point is this immediate loading. They call it teeth in a day, which is a little bit deceiving. But what they mean by that is the same day the implants are placed, the patient goes home with a fixed provisional that the patient can't remove.
Sure.
So it's not the final bridge, but it's provisional. And the studies have shown that as long as the implants are splinted together rigidly, immediate loading works. Mm-hmm. And it's like, and even when they're all on four, they tip the implants back. That tipping doesn't. You'd think that would overstress the implants, but as long as all the implants are splinted together rigidly with that bridge, even tipping the implants back, it doesn't overload them. There's actually less stress on them because you've shortened the cantilevers. You look at these bridges. You look at the Golden Gate Bridge. All these arches are tipped at angles going along it. All those bridge abutments are all tipped, right? Well, it's strong as long as it's all joined together.
Yeah.
So that works. You just have to put the patient on a soft diet because they just they don't realize, they have no proprioception. They don't realize the kind of forces that all of a sudden they're generating. They go from a full denture to a fixed. They have 10 times the biting force. All of a sudden they can't. And so you have to try to tell them, don't eat anything you have to cut with a knife, for the first couple of months.
Yeah, they can
immediate loading.
Yeah, they can generate a lot more pressure than they think, but it really provides a good solution now. That all assumes that that obviously the implants get torqued in to bone with enough torque, and then like you said, you can fix them all together. So there's definitely some criteria there that needs to be met.
Yeah, another advantage to immediate loading these hybrid denture bridges is you can use them for the final transfer, where the patient comes back in 3 months, and if the provisional is fitting well, most likely, it's going to be fitting well because those were all added at chair side with the auto cure, right?
Yeah.
So it's like you're making a verification jig. So the provisional becomes a verification jig.
Yeah.
So you can use that for the transfer. You can take an under-over impression. The lab can mount it and make a index, and then so you're not going around and around in circles, completely starting off with first impression verification jig, and then you can even have your bite registration all ready to go, a try-in all ready to go, all from transferring that provisional, using it to pull that off in the impression. Get some long. Those long open tray impression screws, pull that off in the impression and mount it. And that's an accurate transfer because you've learned a lot. The patient has been wearing this bridge for 3 months.
Yeah.
And you can ask them, what do you think? How's it going? What do you want to change? And in your provisionals, don't use cheap teeth. Use the same kind of teeth you're going to use from the final, because you want to ask the patient, what do you think? Do you like how it looks? Do you want to change anything? And you can use that as the starting point if you want to make any changes.
Yeah. Now this over-under impression, you mean like squirt some light body underneath the bridge and then use an impression tray with some heavy body on top, and then just pick the whole thing up in the mouth?
Right. The open tray. So you're used as if it's a verification jig.
Yeah.
So you're pulling this bridge off, this provisional off as if it's a verification jig, and then mount it. Yeah. And then the lab makes like a silicone putty index of where those teeth are.
Yeah.
And so you're not going around and around. Sometimes the patients will say, they'll get their final bridge and they'll say they like the provisional better.
Yeah.
Because you've made so many changes to the final, it wasn't like the provisional. And the provisional, oftentimes, especially if it started out as an immediate, right, is those denture teeth were set right in the same, incisal and facial as their natural teeth.
Yeah.
Right. So that's in the proper position for phonetics and for the VDO and all that. And then now all of a sudden, if you make changes on the new one, completely change all that, it can cause problems.
Yeah. Yeah. You definitely want to make sure you've got your steps down for that. So it should be identical to the final, but just out of a better material. You don't want to put something in there that hasn't been tested and tried and true. And I think that's what you're talking about.
Or you can make little changes and do a try-in if they want the teeth to show a little bit more, or whatever.
Yeah,
have another try-in. And I found that when the doing try-ins, one thing I learned working in the clinic was don't set all the teeth for your first try-in. What we do is we wouldn't set the lower teeth. I'm sorry, we wouldn't set the lower posteriors. We set them all but the lower posteriors.
Yeah.
And then we'd always do a remount. And what we'd ask the patient, we'd put on some Alu-Wax and have patients swallow as they close, because it's almost impossible to hold your jaw crooked and swallow. And that would get them back into proper eccentric relation, have them kind of swallow into that Alu-Wax. And we'd almost always remount it and do one final try-in with all the teeth. And then that would save us from having a finished restoration with the bites off.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, finding that centric bite can be tricky. So any tip or trick you can do to get that figured out before is definitely advantageous.
Yeah. Right. And then what I found a lot in the conventional labs is the one mistake I saw more than anything else was the bite was too open. Where the patients with their new dentures, they were like clicking.
Yes.
And so when we worked in the dental clinic we worked at, we'd have the patients say like M, we'd measure there and then go have some freeway space, about 3 or 4 millimeters of freeway space, to be sure that their new set isn't clicking. So there's little tricks you can do on getting that vertical. I mean, you want to open it up, have their jaw look better opening up, but you don't want to overdo it.
Yeah, that M, is a good way to find the patient rest position.
Right.
And then you can
close
it.
And then we usually go about
close it 3 or 4, and there's your centric.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So now you have that freeway space.
Yeah.
But then on these hybrid dentures, on the final, I do recommend night guards. Do you usually make a night guard?
I don't even make hybrids. I make all on 4. I make Zest locator retained dentures, or I do zirconia. I don't even make hybrids.
Oh.
Yeah.
What about yours all zirconia? Do you make night guards for those?
Depends what they're up against, but yeah, I like to.
Have you ever done upper and lower zirconia?
Yep. And those are the best. Those are the
or no?
Well, those are the best ones to make night guards for too. It's some people talk about the noise it makes when you get those 2 arches of zirconia against each other. I think it comes down exactly what you're talking about. If you put the bite in the right spot, people's teeth shouldn't be clicking too much anyway. Your teeth don't actually touch that often. When you think about it, when you're talking, they don't really. When you're eating, your teeth don't even touch that often. So,
right, you have a bolus.
Yeah, you got something separating them there. So really, it's about finding that tooth position. I spent a lot of time in temporaries and the PMMA version of the finals, and I spent a lot of time in those and get those perfect, because if you do that phase right, a lot of the problems can be avoided, hopefully. But yeah, you definitely need to evaluate night guards, because different materials definitely wear.
And another issue that I said our business kind of goes in cycles, right? Back to the all-on-4 bridges. Another one is screw retain crowns.
Yes.
We're getting a big reversion back to screw retain crowns, which they disappeared for a long time and now back. And the one issue I've seen more often with screw retain crowns is the contacts. Like you'll have say the adjacent crowns kind of leaning forward, but the implant is tipping back. And now all of a sudden you're trying to screw in this crown and then the contacts are off. So that's the one issue. If you're planning it, look at the contacts of the adjacent teeth and kind of tilt the implant to that same, path of insertion. So we don't have 2 different paths of insertions, one path for the implant and one path for the crown. That's the biggest issue I see with screw retain crowns.
Yeah, I agree. Path of insertion is a big deal for all implant crowns, because the last thing you want to do is get a food trap. And so I think that's part of an issue. I also feel like part of the issue can be, the gingival contouring. Are you just using a stock abutment and putting a pumpkin on top of a fence post, or are you doing gingival emergence and really making it fit appropriately, so you're not having food impactions and proper flossing zones? And those are definitely things to think about the prosthetic in, maybe when you're placing the implants, but then also how to develop those places. And make sure that you're not creating, like you said, flossing problems or food trap issues.
Well, that's an advantage with the screw retain crown, because it's made together outside. It's not 2 separate units put together. So, and
yes,
the traditional way for screw retain is always the gold UCLA, cast to a gold UCLA.
Yes.
But with the price of those and the price of alloys, you end up with like a $500 or $600 lab bill just for your custom abutment. And so, the trend now is to use like a little titanium interface and then make like an Emax crown, and then you cement those together outside the mouth. And now you have all that together as one, and you're done.
Yeah, that's how I make mine. I make my titanium custom abutment, and then a screw retained Emax crown on top, cemented outside the mouth, and then screwed all in together. And it's kind of blending the two philosophies together, but still having the screw retained retrievability, but still having the titanium custom under. I want the custom abutment for the underside and the contacts and the gingiva, and then you kind of put all the best resources together.
Yeah. You could even have them gold anodized to make those look nice.
Yeah, definitely anodize those. Yeah.
And do you usually try your Emax crown in just before you cement them together, just for your contacts in the mount?
Typically not. My lab normally nails it, but that would be a good idea too.
Because that's a problem if you need to add to a contact and it's been cemented together already. Because then now the lab's going to have to, put the crown in the oven and burn out the cement and kind of take it all over again. So sometimes it's best to try it in before they're cemented together.
Yeah, that could definitely reduce your headaches. But use a good lab and pay them well and get a good product and take good impressions, and you don't get a lot of that. But
you were telling me that you use Root Lab. They've been around forever.
I use a lot of them for stuff. Yeah, they're great, of course, but they're in my backyard, so I can't help but to like it. And they've got some good experience. And I've got another group here that does good. Steve's Precision. I've got a guy over there that does some good work for me. So I've got a couple good ones in town. Being in a big city, I don't have to farm everything out to the mega labs just for cheap pricing and all that.
Right.
So
that's a real good tip though for a dentist that are new to implants is hook yourself up with the experienced technicians. They can make your life a lot easier.
Yeah, I've got guys that I work with that have been making implant crowns longer than I've been alive. So it's it definitely, they know what they're doing, and I go over there and I just say, teach me something today, guys, and just learn from them, because they'll teach you more on the lab side. That'll teach you more about dentistry on the clinician side than you can read in a textbook for sure.
Right, no kidding. Oh, and the other thing we were talking about screw retained. We're going to have the next couple of months. We'll have an off-axis screws and screwdriver.
Yeah,
you've probably seen those where your crown, your trajectory can be going forward, but with this off-axis screw and screwdriver, you can be like 25 degrees in. So, so your trajectory can be coming through the incisal, but your screwdriver can come up through the cingulum and catch the screw.
Yeah, I've done some of those with Nobel, so those are an advantage for sure.
Yeah, they call it ASC, angled screw channel or something. Yeah, but it's only for their custom abutments. We'll have it for stock abutments. We'll have a little stock interface, pre-made stock interface that you can still use. We call it off-axis. So that's going to be another because of this trend to screw retain. This way, you'll be able to do it even if your implants are trajectory through the incisal or through the through the incisal.
Yeah, that's great. I almost think about it like let's make the first part kind of like make it the first part to where it's almost like a multi-unit where you screw that one down first, and then you screw down your other crown on top of that at an off angle. I mean, I think almost like a smaller, more complex multi-unit for some of these off angle anteriors might be like where it's headed. Yeah, well, there's a channel in the back, so it's like a interface, like a little titanium interface. And then with a channel in the back that you can go at an angle. But you will have to use special screws and special screwdriver. Yeah, they are. One more issue. Yeah. Can I do just one more issue on screws loosening? Mm-hmm. Loosening. We found one, like healing abutments. We found the most common, a doctor will say, well, the healing abutment came loose. And the common is we find that they didn't use any bone contouring or crestal bone drill. And so the bone is higher on one side than the other. So you screw that healing abutment down tight, and it feels tight, but it's actually contacting the bone, say on the lingual or wherever. Yeah. And so then that bone dies away, and now you've got a loose healing abutment. And it also can happen with a flared, say, your final abutment. Say maybe you used a straight impression coping, but now you have a flared final abutment, can be hitting that bone on one side, and then your screw, that bone dies away, and then you have a loose screw. So that's another thing to watch out for that can cause screw loosening. Yeah, and that's just the bone contact. Yeah, that's just from not removing that crestal portion of bone around the implant to diverge away from the interface there. Right. Yeah, we have something called the crestal bone drill just for that.
but you don't think about it sometimes, and that can cause a problem later on that regard.
Yeah, you don't, because guys are really burying their implants deep now, so you run into issues with some of that as or if the bone's coming up around one side, it's not the other. You almost want to flatten that out so you can get all your abutment space in there.
Right. Yeah, that can cause an issue for sure.
Yeah, I've had that happen a time or two, and looking back, I didn't use that crystal bone remover like I should have.
Oh, very good.
Well, what else do we need to cover here, Darwin? I know we've covered a lot. I mean, your mind is very you have a great way of thinking about implants, and you know a lot. So we could talk all day, but is there any other major topics you think we should cover?
Well, maybe another issue for screw loosening is just not a passive fit model.
Yeah,
passive fit framework.
Sure.
So always take out all the screws but one, do the one screw test, and then the other side of the framework can still be down. If it's not, that's going to be making your screws come loose. And so that's why we recommend that you have the lab make a verification jig for these bridges where they're non-engaging cylinders, and the lab sends you a verification jig. Try that in or patch it back together, pull that off an impression. Then you'll have a passive fit model, because we don't want to have to go to, cutting and laser welding.
Yeah.
So that's another big issue, is getting these. You use a verification jig, and your labs can do that for you. You patch that. It requires one more impression, but it gives you peace of mind. You'll have that passive fit framework, because at Custom Direct we get it down to 3 and 5 microns from one side to the other, from one molar side to the other molar side. With one screw, it's like 3 to 5 microns, and that's just an amazing passive fit. And then you don't have to worry about screw loosening.
Yeah. And that's why people say, well, why do we have to take 2 impressions? The first one's just to set the model and get the jigs, and then you definitely need to do the second one to pick that up, because that little difference over a long time could cause, bridge failure, implant failure, screw failure. I mean, it creates so many problems long term just from not doing one little step that creates, the assurance that things are going to work for you. So I think definitely the verification jigs are a must.
Yeah. Oh, very good. Yeah.
Well, Darwin, I'll tell you what, I gotta go
on your mind, or?
I gotta go finish some dentistry here today. We're talking over lunch hour. I gotta go cut some more teeth and pay those bills, my man. So I'll tell you what, I would love to follow back up with you. I'll digest all this and get this posted, and maybe one day we'll do another follow-up after some fun stuff's come out of the market, and or maybe when there's something else to talk about. But I really appreciate your time. You're a wealth of knowledge. I know you guys are doing a great job there at Implant Direct and Attachments International. So I encourage everyone to give you guys a chance if they haven't, or if they have any trouble, just to reach out to you. And if people want to get a hold of you, they can just give you guys a call at Attachments International, right?
Well, yeah, Implant Direct, or just it's Darwin at attachments.com. So that's easy to remember.
Darwin at attachments.com. All right.
That'll do it.
I'll tell you what, Darwin, thanks for your time today. Hope things go well, and look forward to seeing you again, buddy. Okay.
My pleasure. Very good.
You take good care. Bye-bye.